Chapter 3. A gust of cold wind blows over, reminding the people standing at the door to leave. Yu Xingzhou looked at the curtain like rain, and when he was hesitating whether to rush into the rain, Qin Lezhi took out the umbrella from his bag, opened it and raised it above his head. After looking at each other, Qin Lezhi smiled, took his arm, and the two walked to the parking place together. The two walked for several minutes at a distance of about 10 meters. When they stood in front of the car, Yu Xingzhou whispered, "Then I'm going home." Qin Lezhi held his arm and did not let go, lowered his head and leaned against his chest, and said coquettishly, "You can stay with me for a while. I'm afraid that at dawn, I will find that all this is a dream." Yu Xingzhou licked the corner of his lips, not knowing where to put his eyes. After a while, he still raised his arms and hugged Qin Lezhi's back. The two of them looked extremely crowded under a lady's umbrella, and the night rain was pattering down on Qin Lezhi's neck, making her shiver from the cold, but she still didn't let go of her hand. "Cold?" Yu Xingzhou asked. Qin Lezhi hugged Yu Xingzhou even tighter. "It won't be cold with you here." "Yeah." Yu Xingzhou said, "I'm really going back. I'm going to work tomorrow morning." Hearing this, Qin Lezhi let go of Yu Xingzhou, and when he looked up at him, there was misty water vapor in his eyes, and his whole body was so weak that it seemed that the rain could melt her if it was heavier. She hooked Yu Xingzhou's little finger with her little finger and shook it gently. "Xingzhou, I hope you will think about what I said today. I can give you what she can give you, and I can give you what she can't give you." After finishing speaking, she let go of her hand and said in a low voice, "My little uncle is still waiting for me, so I'll go first." Yu Xingzhou watched Qin Lezhi get into a Rolls-Royce, his eyes flickered under the street lights above his head, and his Adam's apple moved slightly. He turned and walked slowly towards his car. In the night, his vision became blurred. He took out the car keys, pressed the unlock button, and reached out to pull the car door, but he felt something hard. When he saw what it was, his heartbeat suddenly accelerated, his blood flowed backwards, his consciousness went blank for an instant, and his nerves were about to explode. It was 3:45 in the morning. The rain should have stopped, and the whistle on the road was clear and piercing. Shuyi lay flat on the bed, staring at the ceiling with his eyes open. His mind was buzzing and chaotic, but his heart was empty, as if he had been emptied of oxygen. After she came back, she was not idle, went to the utility room and took out a cardboard box, and put all the things Yu Xingzhou gave her these days into it. Some used ones could not be returned, so she made a list and put them in the box, intending to cash them all to him, including Song Lilan's concert tickets, which were originally intended to be seen by the two of them together, but now they can only return the other ticket money to him. But at this moment, she just needs to wait quietly for Yu Xingzhou to come to her. Not long after, the doorbell rang. From Shuyi's understanding of him, he must be covered in rain, standing pitifully outside the door, waiting to explain to her and beg her to forgive. She even predicted the lines, and said, "You listen to me to explain," and then he would pull the corner of her clothes with red eyes, just like he did when he confessed to her. Thinking of this, Shuyi laughed to himself. It felt like it was all a dream. She didn't have much strength when she got up, but she still managed to show up in front of Yu Xingzhou. There was only one light on in the corridor. It was dim, but it was enough to illuminate Yu Xingzhou's face clearly. He was holding a blue lace umbrella in his hand, and his hair was limp, but clean, with no water stains on his body. It was different from Shuyi's imagination. He arched his shoulders, lowered his head, raised his eyes, and glanced at Shuyi, then lowered his eyes immediately. Calligraphy. Shuyi raised her chin, and when she was about to say the rehearsed unforgiveness, she heard the other side say, "Let's break up." "Shuyi, I love you very much, and I really want to be with you forever, but this kind of life is too tiring, and I can never see where the nodes are. It is a luxury for me to buy a small house in this city." Wait. Shuyi came back to his senses and interrupted him quickly. "What do you mean?" "Shuyi." He frowned, gritted his teeth, and said what was in his heart, "We all have to be realistic. Her family is unusual. My uncle drives a Rolls-Royce, and even the license plate number is consecutive. There is only one car in Jiangqing. If you have money and power, I also want to see Pingbu Qingyun 20 years later. I think we are still suitable to be friends." Shuyi almost lost his breath, and was only a fingernail away from dying on the spot. So in the end, before she even spoke, she was preemptively dumped. Yu Xingzhou. Shuyi held his breath, clutching the door frame tightly, and said word by word, "Have you brought my mobile phone? Bring it up." Yu Xingzhou still didn't dare to meet her eyes, glanced at her hurriedly, then lowered his head and took out his phone. Shuyi snatched her mobile phone, took a deep breath, and kicked out the cardboard box and Yu Xingzhou in one go. "Who the hell wants to be your friend? To be your ancestor?" Ah. The sound of the door slamming resounded throughout the corridor, and Shuyi could still feel the vibration of the door panel even when she was leaning on it, and she slid down her chest again and again to ensure that she would not carry it all in one go. After a while of silence, footsteps finally sounded outside the door. Shuyi couldn't hold back the last trace of expectation, hoping that Yu Xingzhou could still be a person. So she turned around and looked through the cat's eyes, only to see Yu Xingzhou took 2 steps with the cardboard box in his arms, then suddenly squatted down again, put the cardboard box on the ground, and buried his head in searching for something inside. The box was filled with things sent by Yu Xingzhou, including ceramics, decorations, books, and many scattered gadgets. After a while, he took out some small things and put them in his coat bag, but left the box and went into the elevator. No way. Shuyi was stunned for a moment, and blinked hard. If she read correctly, what Yu Xingzhou took away was the only valuable gold brooch in that box. At this moment, anger flooded the sky, not allowing her to have any more nostalgia. Shuyi threw herself on the bed, beat the pillow over and over again, but still couldn't erase those images in her mind. Every time he closes his eyes, he thinks of Yu Xingzhou's look of being wronged when he is with her, which makes Shuyi keep his eyes open until dawn. But she only took half a day off, and in the afternoon she still dressed up and went to the company. A scumbag can be lost, but performance cannot be lost. Mingyu Bank has called, and the character interview will be postponed to next Thursday. Editor-in-Chief Tang Yi asked you submit a new outline to me as soon as possible. Oh, hearing Shuyi's lifeless voice, Tang Yi raised his eyebrows. This is a common thing. If you get angry now, what will you do in the future? I'm not angry. Speaking of it, I have to thank Shi Yan. Shuyi said in a nonchalant tone, otherwise, how would I find out that my boyfriend, oh no, did my ex-boyfriend cheat? What? Changed to an ex-boyfriend? Tang Yi seemed to be shocked, but when he said the last word, his consonants rose and his eyebrows danced. He almost wrote the words "it's so funny" on his face. Shuyi. Ouch. Tang Yi covered his mouth and said in order not to let himself go too far, should I not be so happy? Shuyi didn't have the energy to put on any expression, so he just said lightly, it's okay, it's just that the crow's feet are smiling. Tang Yi changed his face instantly, turned his head to look at the computer coldly, raised his middle finger and pressed the corners of his eyes. I told you a long time ago, your boyfriend is not good. What kind of qualifications do you have? Then what kind of boyfriend do I want? Shuyi's mind reappeared the picture of last night, and he said to himself, one with a Rolls Royce. Can't you? Tang Yi stood up and stuffed a document into her arms. You have knowledge, good looks, a decent job, and a bright future in the future. Why don't you deserve it? This unlimited future is actually Tang Yi's plan for Shuyi a long time ago. She was the one who recruited Shuyi from the newspaper in the first place, just to create a human-shaped signboard exclusively for Financial Weekly. Shuyi graduated from one of the top universities of finance and economics in China with a major in journalism. She has excellent professional skills, and the little girl can also suffer from the hardships of Times journalists. Most importantly, Tang Yi felt that she possessed extraordinary beauty. Even in serious industries, beauty is a particularly eye-catching medium. If it is played together with the education and ability cards, it will be Wang Jia. So she felt that when Shuyi published a few articles that received a lot of attention, Financial Weekly would help her. It will bring greater benefits to the magazine. Oh. Shuyi was too lazy to discuss this issue with Tang Yi, and looked down at the thing in his hand. What is this? There is a financial summit in the afternoon. If you can't die, follow the clues. Tang Yi waved at her, indicating that she could go. There is also an interview with Mingyu Bank next week, so prepare well. This is the benefit of having an unkind boss. Shuyi didn't even have time to be hypocritical, so she went to the bathroom to touch up her makeup before leaving the company in a hurry. The summit was held in the new financial center of Jiangcheng. It is located on the remote 4th Ring Road. It was only completed last year. The surrounding area is still in the development stage. There are basically no pedestrians on the road except for cars. But Shuyi is no stranger to this place. One is because she often goes here for interviews, and the other is because Yu Xingzhou works here. In the past, if she had time, she would come here to wait for Yu Xingzhou to get off work, and then the two of them would have dinner and watch a movie together, and then go to one of her favorite dessert shops to buy small cakes. So now that Shuyi had listened to the entire summit, she subconsciously turned into that dessert shop. When she came back to her senses, the clerk was already greeting her warmly. Shuyi took out the egg tarts she usually bought from the cabinet. The 2 red grapes on the yellow cheese looked very much like Yu Xingzhou's hateful face. The clerk stood aside, watching Shuyi show an expression of murdering his father and enemy to an egg tart. "Miss, that." The clerk said cautiously, "It's afternoon, buy 1 egg tart and get 1 free." As soon as the words were finished, there was a welcome sound at the door, and the clerk hurried to greet the new customers. And Shuyi was still staring at the egg tart until a familiar voice sounded behind him. She turned her head abruptly, meeting Yu Xingzhou's eyes unexpectedly. Yu Xingzhou was stunned for a moment, standing at the door, wondering whether he should go any further. After a while, he turned his face away, pulled the woman beside him and said, "Come by it tomorrow." Only then did Shuyi notice that the woman he was leading was the one he saw in the hospital last night. "Don't even look like it. You came to break up with her last night, and today they came out hand in hand to show off." No. Although Qin saw Shuyi, she didn't plan to leave. "I'm used to eating here, and I don't feel comfortable if I don't eat for a day." She walked to Shuyi's side, took out a whole box of egg tarts sideways, and gave Shuyi a sideways glance as she withdrew her hand. That look clearly indicated that she knew who Shuyi was, but she didn't have the slightest sense of being a mistress, and even revealed a sense of complacency, showing off to everyone that she got the whole table. Shuyi was dazzled by her eyes, making her temples ache suddenly. "Okay, I will bear it." She threw away the egg tart and left the dessert shop without looking back. But when she stepped out of the gate, she suddenly thought of something, so she stopped and turned her head immediately, just in time to meet Qin looking at her with the eyes of a winner. Shuyi's gaze moved down, and she saw that the shiny golden thing on her scarf was indeed the brooch that Yu Xingzhou took away last night. Although his expression was calm, it seemed that there were tens of thousands of hot coals crushing Shuyi's chest back and forth, and his anger would burst out anytime and anywhere. After walking for a few days, Shuyi finally couldn't bear it and kicked a big tree by the side of the road. Dashi was terrified at the time, he had never seen such an angry woman. Shuyi lowered her head, her chest heaved violently, and she clearly felt her cheeks burning hot from anger. There were constant noises of cars on the road. She turned her head slightly, and saw Yu Xingzhou and Qin coming out. Yu Xingzhou held the dessert box in his hand, and Qin jumped into his co-pilot with his arm in his arms. "Just released from the zoo and haven't learned to walk upright yet." Shuyi stared at that direction until his teeth were gritted, and then he opened his legs and walked forward. She didn't know what she was doing either. "Instead of taking a taxi or going to the subway station, I just walked aimlessly on this wide and somewhat lonely road step by step." After walking for an unknown amount of time, it was getting dark, and Shuyi stopped at an intersection to hail a taxi. Just as she was looking into the middle of the road, a car parked on the opposite street caught her attention unexpectedly. When her eyes gradually focused, the bright Rolls-Royce logo seemed to be shining with golden light. The license plate number was the string she saw at the hospital last night, and it was also the serial numbered license plate that Yu Xingzhou called the only one in Jiangqing. A thought quickly flashed through Shuyi's mind, and what Tangi said to her today. "You have knowledge, good looks, a decent job, and a bright future in the future. Why don't you deserve it?" The cold wind blew wantonly on his face, but his thoughts were surging in his mind like heat waves. Not very rational, not very calm, but in just 3 seconds, Shuyi made a decision that upended her future life. Some people, if you don't let him pay for what he did, he won't think you are free and easy, he will only think you are stupid. Don't you want to save 20 years of struggle? I thought so too. Don't you want to lean against the mountains? I thought so too. Even if you can't make you pay the price, you still have to respectfully call me little aunt when you flatter me in the future. When thinking of this, Shuyi was already standing beside the car. She looked at herself reflected in the car window and brushed her hair. Although the face in the mirror was a bit haggard, it had a different kind of charm, different from Shuyi's usual lively and charming, and now there was a sense of pitiful fragility. She raised her hand and knocked on the window. There was no movement for a long time. When Shuyi almost thought that there was no one in the car for so long, the window finally rolled down slowly. At first, Shuyi only saw a pair of gold-rimmed glasses with anti-skid chains. Afterwards, the entire face was slowly revealed, followed by Shuyi's curse words secretly in his heart. Anyone who has seen this face will not forget it in a short time. Shuyi naturally also remembers that this is the person who offered to send her home at Warner Manor last night. It's just that she didn't expect that Qin Leji's face, looking at the clear soup and water, the little uncle, would have such a look. There didn't seem to be much accident when the man was knocked on the car window, he just looked over lightly. Although embarrassing, Shuyi felt that it was not entirely a bad thing. At least, didn't he have a little bit of fun last night? So Shuyi bent down and said softly, "Sir, my phone is out of battery and I can't get a taxi. Can I borrow your phone to make a call?" Shi Yan didn't even turn his head but turned his face slightly and gave Shuyi a sideways look. Looking at each other, Shuyi couldn't see what he meant, so he said, "Or, you can give me a ride if you want." Shi Yan stared at her for a while. His eyebrows are long and narrow, and the cold texture of the glasses just suppresses the frivolity in the upturned eyes. A few seconds later, Shi Yan slowly looked away. "My car doesn't carry a woman with a boyfriend." Shuyi. The vehicle just reversed in front of her and sped towards the road. Chapter 4. Orange clouds billowed in the sky, and the passage of time became visible to the naked eye. The editorial department of the magazine turned on direct desk lamps, and everyone was immersed in the continuous sound of keyboards, and even the air was filled with the sense of urgency of the deadline. Shuyi wrote today's manuscript to the end, and the feeling of bewilderment dissipated, and she accepted the fact that the man who tried to strike up a conversation with her last night was Xiaoson's little uncle, and he refused to strike up today with a grudge. It's quite vengeful. Shuyi didn't know that there was a strange arc on the corner of his lips. He was staring at the screen, typing quickly with both hands, chanting words, and seemed to be full of ideas and inspiration. The wealth management companies are expected to enter into new financing plans next year. The young man suffered from menstrual disorders and pimples all over his face and contracted onychomycosis. What? Kong Nan, who was sitting next to him, squinted his eyes and leaned over his upper body. After taking a look, he asked, "What are you writing?" Shuyi returned to his soul, blinked his eyes, glanced at the screen, and calmly deleted that line. Nothing. She closed the computer, looked up at the glow outside the window, lost in thought. After writing the draft for this afternoon's summit, Shuyi didn't go home from get off work, and stayed in the office to write the interview outline for Shi Yan. Frustrated in love, always proud in the workplace, Shuyi is bound to come up with a stunning and brilliant manuscript to shock Tang Yi, lest Tang Yi always feel that she is broken in love and looks like a pitiful creature. Shuyi not only has a strong desire for revenge, but also has a strong sense of self-esteem. In the blink of an eye, it was Friday, and Shuyi took the recorder and notebook to the headquarters of Mingyu Bank. Like other office buildings, the reception desk on the first floor of Mingyu headquarters requires visitors to register their identity. This office building has a good orientation, and the sunlight is shining in. It shines on the smiling faces of the three men and women in formal suits at the reception desk, bringing a bit of smoke and fire to the cold building. The big security guard stood aside, glanced at the press card hanging on Shuyi's chest, and said casually, "Are all the reporters in your magazine so beautiful?" Shuyi smiled as a response to the compliment, but the moment she picked up the pen, her eyes suddenly flashed. Su Yuling, how could there be Su Yuling's name on the register? Although this name is common, it should not be the same name and surname. After all, the column for the purpose of the visit later says interview. Speaking of Su Yuling, Shuyi has been at odds with her since the first day she joined the magazine, and there have been incidents of snatching information sources in the past 2 years. So Shuyi saw Su Yuling's name on the register, and noticed that the time of visit was 10 o'clock this morning, and suddenly had an ominous premonition in his heart. Shuyi immediately ran towards the elevator. In the elevator, time seemed to be pulled very slowly. Although Shuyi was standing upright, his hands were clenched into fists unconsciously, and his heart was hanging in his throat. Half a minute later, the elevator arrived, and a ding pierced Shuyi's calmness. As soon as she looked up, she saw Chen Xing passing by the corridor in front of her. Secretary Chen. Shuyi called him to stop, and stepped out of the elevator in 3 steps at a time. "I am Shuyi, a reporter from Financial Weekly. I have an appointment with the CEO office for an exclusive interview at 3:30 this afternoon. Chen Xing frowned slightly, with doubts on his face. Aren't you busy? When Shuyi heard it, the rest of his heart also went cold. Sure enough, Su Yuling came to intercept the beard. Sure enough, Chen Xing immediately said, your colleague has finished the interview. Shuyi's mind was half empty in an instant. Chen Xing glanced at his watch, and added, she came in the morning, but Mr. Shi happens to be free. Shuyi. If the swear words would be silenced, the beep beep in her heart was already up to the level of disturbing people. But what can she do? Shi Yan responded to the invitation of Financial Weekly, so it didn't care which reporter came, let alone bear the consequences for their internal calculations. And the manuscript must be published. The editor-in-chief can at most say that Su Yuling is not kind, and it is impossible to withdraw the interview with the characters of Shi Yan because of this so-called moral sense. Shuyi nodded, clenched his teeth, and forced a stiff smile. I'm sorry, but we didn't communicate well internally. In fact, Chen Xing is such a fine person that he can't see the twists and turns, but one more thing is worse than one less thing, and he nodded following Shuyi's words, please run for a while. No, Shuyi's voice suddenly stopped, and he didn't say the word trouble after that, and looked at the other side blankly. 10 meters away from her, the door of the president's office automatically opened, and the 6 assistants and secretaries sitting at the workstations got up, and a young woman in professional attire also immediately stepped aside. Where the light is focused, the man walks over with a calm expression, stealing everyone's attention silently. When the line of sight flicked across a place randomly, the frame of the mirror refracted cold light dots, embellishing his silhouette, and the feeling of repelling people thousands of miles away emerged completely. The surrounding windows are bright and clean, but it is surprisingly quiet. Shuyi blinked her eyes, making sure that she was not dazzled. The man in front of her was the little uncle she had been looking for a week. But at this moment, she didn't have the sense of joy that came without effort, but felt that she was struck by lightning. Seeing him in this place, one can almost conclude that this person is the banquet she has been talking about for half a month. No wonder Yu Xingzhou wanted to run away with others. It turned out that he had such a background behind him. What a fucking coincidence. This fate is really wonderful. If Shuyi hadn't rejected his strike up and then went to strike up a conversation with him. When Shuyi's mind was thundering, Chen Xing had already walked to Shi Yan's side and whispered something in his ear. Shi Yan raised his eyes to look over, and collided with Shuyi's confused, bewildered and embarrassed eyes. Shuyi froze, his expression was a little stiff, but he couldn't look back naturally, and just looked at Shi Yan so directly. They just stared at each other for a second or two. Regardless of Shuyi's expression at the moment, Shi Yan ignored all the information in her eyes, calmly withdrew his gaze, and walked towards the elevator. Shuyi stood still, brainstorming crazily, and quickly listed 2 feasible directions for himself. First, she walked away in despair, pretending that nothing happened, and since then, the 3 characters Shuyi disappeared in Shi Yan's world. Second, the primary school teacher said that one should not give up any opportunities and must face up to difficulties. She has to do the interview, and she has to do the same with her little aunt. The body seems to have made the choice in advance instead of the brain. Shuyi quickly bent his smiling eyes, with a faint smile on the corner of his mouth. She has thick and smooth black long hair, neatly parted in the middle. One side of the hair is tied behind the ear, and the other side naturally hangs by the cheek, extremely dignified. But when he laughed, the brilliance in his eyes couldn't even suppress the serious dress, like butterflies fluttering their wings and scrambling to fly out. In this solemn office corridor, her whole body seemed to come alive. But Shi Yan's eyes never fell on her again, as if standing in front of him was a wax figure. He just passed her by. Shuyi. Her smile remained unchanged. She stared at the air and nodded to cheer herself up, then turned around and said, Mr. Shi, we have an appointment for this afternoon's interview. Shi Yan stopped in his tracks, turned his head to look over, and raised his eyebrows. The air in this area seemed to have stopped flowing, and the surrounding assistant secretaries passed their inquiring gazes over, surrounding Shuyi and Shi Yan. Everyone present knows that today's interview with Kaijing Weekly is over. Even Chen Xing on the side was stunned. Miss, have you lost your memory? How could Shuyi not feel the atmosphere around her? She was beating her heart, but she still had to try her best to look at Shi Yan as if she didn't know anything. But if she doesn't gamble, she can only return empty-handed today. Shuyi pinched his palms, raised his smiling face, and said in a clear voice, "I have been looking forward to this interview for a long time, and finally it's today. Do you think it's convenient now?" After the voice fell, the aisle was so quiet that a needle could be discerned. Shi Yan's upper eyelids drooped slightly, and the moment he looked away, he saw her tightly clenched hands hanging by her legs. Because of the force, the joints were light blue. Suddenly, the person in front of him frowned, his lips slightly curled up, staring at him closely, and said in a voice so small that only he could hear, "Just hold you up for a while, okay?" After the banquet, the molars suddenly itched. After a while, he didn't even raise his eyes, but his emotionless voice was heard clearly in everyone's ears. "Come over." It was eerily quiet all around. Everyone looked at each other in blank dismay, shocked, but did not dare to ask more questions. In the end, probably only Shuyi came to his senses. It wasn't until Shi Yan walked away that she suddenly came back to her senses. "Is it convenient for you to read? Come over." According to Shuyi's understanding, that is, I am convenient. I am so convenient. What kind of living bodhisattva is this? She turned around in surprise, and the living bodhisattva had already reached the elevator entrance, so she followed immediately. The elevator is descending at a constant speed. The space has changed from a spacious office area to a relatively narrow elevator, which is square and square, making it easy for people to concentrate. So Shuyi calmed down now, and looked at the button. The light was on the underground parking lot on the second floor. Shuyi didn't know why he was going to the parking lot, so he glanced at Shi Yan's back, then at Sheng, who was watching his nose and heart, and carefully said to the back of the living bodhisattva, "Mister, I'm going to dash." Suddenly, a cell phone rang. Shuyi could tell clearly that it was Shi Yan's call, so she wisely shut up. But Shi Yan took out his phone slowly, glanced at it, and then hung up. Not long after, Sheng's cell phone rang again. Shuyi couldn't see Shi Yan's expression when he hung up the phone just now, but he could see Sheng's expression. After seeing the caller ID, he frowned quickly, and then picked up. Before he could speak, Shuyi clearly heard a sharp female voice from the phone, "Call my little uncle," to answer the phone. "My day. Small 3. Shuyi's reaction was almost physiological, and she couldn't hold back the chill in her stomach. She clutched the chain of the shoulder bag tightly with both hands, and stared at Shi Yan's back with all kinds of emotions. She wanted to see what Shi Yan's attitude was towards her niece. Sheng handed out the phone, and before he had time to say anything, Shi Yan said as if he had eyes behind his back, "Tell her, don't appear in front of me if she is not obedient." The tone was calm and unwavering, as if explaining 3 meals a day, but there was an inexplicable sense of oppression when listening. Shuyi. She curled her lips and smiled coldly. "It's quite majestic. Why don't you teach your niece not to intervene as a third party if you are so dignified?" Sheng gave a and told the truth, and then the phone was hung up. The elevator returned to calm again. It wasn't until she arrived at the parking lot that her thoughts were relieved from Shi Yan's aggressive attitude towards his niece. This was even better than she had imagined. A strong little uncle, a one-sided little uncle, is so suitable for her to show her power. The door opened, Shi Yan stepped out, and Shuyi followed him step by step. Walking in front of a car, the driver opened the right side door for Shi Yan. At this moment, he seemed to remember that there was a person behind him. He stopped, slowly turned his upper body sideways, and looked down at Shuyi. "I have a 2-hour drive," the car said. Although the other party was not asking for consent, Shuyi still nodded reservedly, "Yes. You can say anything at the bottom of the car." Shi Yan didn't give another reply, and when he turned around, he unbuttoned his suit and got into the car directly. Shuyi looked at the car in front of him, and couldn't help but twitched his lips. "You Xingzhou, unexpected, I got in this car before you," tongue sticking out. Although there were 4 people in the car, there was no sound. It seems that sometimes the place where the banquet is extraordinarily quiet. This was Shuyi's first feeling when he got in the car. This person is like a walking muffler. He leaned back in the chair, took off his glasses, and wiped the lenses slowly with lens cleaning paper. Sensing the movement next to him, he turned his gaze to the right side. Shuyi's long hair, who bent over and sat up with her skirt pressed down, fell like a waterfall, and a faint fragrance was blown to the tip of his nose by the wind. She was wearing an off-white pencil skirt. When she sat down with her legs slanted, the skirt shrank to 10 centimeters above her knees, revealing a pair of slender long legs, which were actually wider than the tight-fitting skirt. Shi Yan retracted his gaze and put on his glasses. The car slowly drove out of the parking lot, and the aroma still seemed to linger on the tip of his nose. Shi Yan suddenly asked, "Is it cold?" Shuyi was stunned for a moment, then looked up at Shi Yan. Didn't expect him to ask her this. So thoughtful and meticulous. Not cold. Shuyi smiled and shook his head. Shi Yan crossed his legs and calmly told the driver, "Open the window." The car window was rolled down, and a gust of cold wind in late autumn blew mercilessly on Shuy's face. Even breathing was pungent. Shuyi, just because I say I'm not cold doesn't mean I'm hot.
Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, remember to subscribe to our channel for more captivating illustrated romance audiobooks. Don't miss out on our latest releases and be part of our growing community. Hit that subscribe button and embark on an enchanting journey with us.